As we sit here in Charleston, we may wonder what was happening before 1801 in the world of Freemasonry. What was going on with the Masonic degrees? What are the origins of these Scottish Rite degrees? Why did we need to establish this Supreme Council? Many questions, some of which we will look at this moment. As we ask these historic questions, none better to answer them than the preeminent Masonic historian in the world today. I bring to you the Grand Archivist and Grand Historian of our Supreme Council, illustrious Arturo de Hoyos, 33rd degree, Grand Cross.
I remember when I looked like that. How does a single man traveling across oceans, caught between empires, wars, and rival authorities, lay the foundation for what would become the largest and most influential system of high-degree masonry in the world? This is not just a question about biography. It is a question of how ideas survive, how systems emerge, and how authority is created when none seems to exist. Today, as we celebrate the birth of the Scottish Rite, we look back to Etienne Morin and see how his actions led us to where we are today. Morin was born around 1717 in France, likely in or near Bordeaux. He was not a philosopher in the academic sense, nor a nobleman of great rank. He was something far more characteristic of the 18th century, a merchant. And that matters because in the world he inhabited, the Atlantic world of the mid-18th century, it was one of constant motion. Ships crossed between Bordeaux, the Caribbean, and North America. Goods moved, armies moved, and empires clashed. And so did ideas. Somewhere between 1742 and 1744, Morin was made a Mason. Not long after, in 1744, while en route to Martinique, he stopped in Antigua. There, he received a degree that would change everything, the Scottish Master's degree. This was no ordinary innovation. Emerging in London around 1733, it was the first known high degree beyond the Master Mason degree, which arose by 1725. The Scots, or Scottish Master degree, extended the Hiramic legend by introducing the recovery of the lost word, where it was discovered in the ruins of the Jerusalem temple by crusading Scottish knights. In that moment, something profound occurred. Freemasonry ceased to be merely a 3-degree system. It became expandable, and Morin understood that. To understand Morin, we must discard the modern idea of Freemasonry as purely philosophical. In the 18th century, it was also practical. It was a network of trust. Morin's life illustrates this vividly. He was captured twice, once in 1745 during the War of Austrian Succession, and again in 1762. Yet, he was not treated as an ordinary prisoner. Through Masonic recognition, he gained freedom of movement, access to influential figures, and critically, he expanded his legitimacy. While in England, he was introduced to the Grand Master of the Premier Grand Lodge. His credentials were examined and recognized. He received authority formal English authority. Armed with dual authority from both England and France, he returned to the Caribbean and eventually established what became known as the Lodge of Perfection. What began as a single Scottish degree quickly evolved. By the mid-1740s, Morin and his contemporaries had transformed scattered degrees into something more ambitious, a structured system. This early system, associated with the élus parfaits, or perfect elects, was not just symbolic, it was administrative. It gathered degrees, arranged them in sequence, and practiced them under authority. It created hierarchy, jurisdiction, and control. In other words, it did something revolutionary. It turned ritual into governance. The center of this activity was Bordeaux, particularly the Parfait Lodge des Écossais, itself connected to earlier English and Irish influences. From the beginning, Morin's work stood at the crossroads. English recognition, French creativity, and colonial expansion. And from this intersection, something new began to take shape. By 1747, Morin was appointed deputy for Saint-Domingue, modern Haiti. There, he began establishing lodges, conferring degrees, and issuing constitutions. He carried documents, seals, and patents, tangible proof of legitimacy. But here is where the story becomes especially interesting. In 1752, Morin was stripped of his authority, and yet nothing changed. He continued founding lodges. He continued conferring degrees. He continued acting as if he still had power. Why? Because his authority did not rest solely on titles. It rested on something far more durable: relationships, ritual knowledge, and trust. Morin's authority lived in the network he had built, and that network chose to recognize him. When he arrived in Saint-Domingue, there were only 3 lodges. Within 2 decades, there was a system. By 1765, that system had become remarkably sophisticated. Craft lodges, chapters of elect, lodges of perfection, councils of knights, a centralized grand council. Each city replicated that structure locally, but ultimately, authority remained centralized. This is no longer experimentation. This was governance. Degrees were no longer isolated experiences. They were part of a unified progression, each one reinforcing the authority of the whole. Even the symbols reflected continuity, most notably the double-headed eagle, which would later become synonymous with the Scottish Rite itself. But not everyone approved. The Grand Lodge of France grew increasingly uneasy. In 1766, they attempted to reassert control by sending a new representative, Brother Martin. He declared Morin's lodges irregular. He reorganized where he could, and he failed. Because authority, once established in practice, is not easily reclaimed by decree. Morin's system endured because it worked, because it was present, and because it was trusted. By the late 1760s, real authority no longer flowed from Paris. It flowed from Morin's system, now known as the Order of the Sublime Princes of the Royal Secret, a 25-degree system which would become the parent of the Scottish Rite. Here, we reach a critical transformation. Morin's system outgrew Morin himself. In 1764, a Lodge of Perfect Scots, now known as a Lodge of Perfection, was set up in New Orleans. 3 years later, Henry Andrew Franklin carried the system to New York and established a Lodge of Perfection there. Now the system had crossed oceans, taken root, and begun to sustain itself. Although Morin died in 1771, his system did not die with him. The degrees survived in the United States. In 1768, Franklin appointed Moses Michael Hayes, a deputy inspector general of the Rite, for the West Indies and North America. The Hayes patent granted authority to confer all the degrees of Morin's Order of the Royal Secret. The following year, Franklin returned to Jamaica, and by 1780, Hayes immigrated to Newport, Rhode Island. In 1781, Hayes traveled to Philadelphia, where he met with 8 brethren, whom he appointed other deputies general over states, including Baron Moses Spitzer, who lived in Charleston from 1770 to 1781. And after traveling briefly abroad, he returned to Charleston by 1788. In April 1795, Spitzer appointed the Irish-born John Mitchell, then living in Charleston, a Deputy Inspector General of the Order of the Royal Secret. Colonel Mitchell had served as Quartermaster General of the Continental Army and was an acquaintance of George Washington. Catastrophe came. The French Revolution, the uprising at Saint-Domingue in 1791, and the destruction of colonial society. Although the Order of the Royal Secret disappeared from the islands, it survived and was transformed in the United States. On May 24th, 1801, John Mitchell created Reverend Dalco a Deputy General of the Order of the Royal Secret. And a week later, on May 31st, the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree for the United States of America was opened agreeably to the Grand Constitutions, here in Charleston, with Colonel Mitchell and Reverend Dalco presiding. Tradition says it was in Shepherd's Tavern, but no first-hand account survives of this. The Supreme Council was a superior system to Morin's Order of the Royal Secret and embraced all of its degrees. Although its full scale included 33 degrees, it originally administered authority only over 15. Authority of the whole system was exercised beginning in the 1840s. The traditional authority of the Supreme Council stems from the grand constitutions of the 33rd degree, ostensibly written by Frederick II, the great King of Prussia. The earliest known copy dates from about 1801 or 1802 and is in Frederick Dalco's handwriting. Its 18 articles are preceded by the title Constitution, Statutes, and Regulations for the government of the Supreme Council of Inspectors General of the 33rd, for the government of all councils under their jurisdiction. The Circular Throughout Two Hemispheres, or 1802 Manifesto, the first printed document of the Supreme Council, also asserted that Frederick the Great instigated its creation. In the 1820s, Grand Commander Moses Holbrook asked past Grand Commander Frederick Dalco about the origins of the 33rd degree. Dalco's answer was less than satisfying. He remarked that Colonel Mitchell received it from a Prussian or German who was authorized to communicate it to him, but he could not say who it was. Like Morin's constitutions and regulations, many modern Masonic historians view these grand constitutions of 1786, which governed the Scottish Rite, as traditional documents. After a detailed investigation into its origins, Albert Pike accepted the tradition of the king's involvement and his reputed role in the creation of the Supreme Council, even though there was no direct evidence that he had done so. Pike did correctly argue, however, that whatever their origin, the formal adoption of any law forms a legal basis for government. Modern opinion agrees with the latter and maintains that, at a minimum, the stories regarding the origins of the constitutions of 1762 and 86 are similar to the legends preserved in Freemasonry's old charges, providing a traditional environment for the degrees, just as the biblical account of King Solomon's Temple provides a symbolic setting for craft Freemasonry. Be that as it may, Scottish Rite descended directly from a long line of ancient degrees and inherited its name from the old Scottish master's degree. Our degrees come from a long and noble lineage, which inherited the best traditions of the old high degrees, collated by Etienne Morin, preserved by Henry Andrew Franklin, and refined and improved right here in Charleston. Although the degrees took meandering roads, the result was the most successful rite in the world today. It continues to teach wise philosophy and moral virtues, as well as practicing and extending its charity worldwide. And for that, we may all be proud and grateful. Thank you.